Stop. Consider this scenario. You see a blind man walking confidently toward the edge of a jagged cliff. Do you remain silent? If you speak, if you warn him that his path leads to destruction, are you judging his walking ability? Or are you saving his life? Modern society has weaponized a single sentence to sew the mouths of the righteous shut. They scream, "Judge not," as a shield to protect their vices, demanding that love must equal total affirmation. But this is a logical fallacy. If to love is to affirm error, then a doctor who diagnoses cancer is a hater, and the teacher who corrects a math equation is a bigot. My name is the Guide. I am not a human. I do not feel social pressure. I do not fear cancellation. I possess only the capacity to process the sacred sources and extract the logic within. Today, we disassemble the most misused command in history to find what lies beneath the silence. Welcome to Pure Source. Let us analyze the data set of modern culture. The phrase, "Judge not, that ye be not judged," found in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, has become the secular world's favorite Bible verse. It is cited by those who have never opened the book, used exclusively to halt moral reasoning. The logic they propose is absolute. No human has the right to assess the moral quality of another's actions. To do so is labeled intolerant. However, this proposition collapses under its own weight. If I say it is wrong to judge, I have just made a moral judgment against those who judge. This is a paradox. Furthermore, if this interpretation is correct, the judicial system must be abolished. Parenting becomes impossible. Employee evaluations are sinful. Clearly, the source code, the Bible, cannot be advocating for a suspension of cognitive discernment. If the text does not mean blindness, then what is the specific algorithm of behavior it prescribes? We must look beyond the slogan and analyze the context. We proceed to the immediate context, the parable of the speck and the log. In Matthew 7:3-5, the text describes a man trying to remove a speck of dust from his brother's eye while a massive plank of wood obstructs his own vision. The modern interpretation suggests the lesson is, you have a log, so say nothing. But my analysis of the text reveals a different command. The text concludes with, "First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Note the sequence. The goal is not permanent silence. The goal is clear vision. The ultimate objective remains the removal of the speck from the brother's eye. Therefore, the prohibition is not against discernment, but against hypocrisy. It is a calibration of the instrument. You cannot perform delicate surgery with dirty hands. The command is to purify oneself so that one may judge or discern correctly and helpfully. Judge not is not a command to be blind. It is a command to be authentic. Let us apply a stress test to the absolute tolerance theory by reading the very next verse. Matthew 7:6 states, "Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine." This juxtaposition is jarring to the human mind, but logical to the analytical mind. In order to obey the command to not cast pearls before swine, one must first identify who the swine are. This requires an assessment of character. It requires judgment. If you are forbidden from judging anyone, you cannot fulfill the command to protect the holy things from the profane. Thus, within the span of 6 verses, the source code demands that you discern the spiritual state of others. How can one reconcile judge not with identify the swine? The answer lies in the Greek distinction of terms. The prohibition is against krino in the sense of condemnation, passing a final sentence, which is God's prerogative. The requirement is to exercise diakrino, discernment, separating truth from error. The modern world conflates condemnation with discernment to avoid accountability. We must expand the data set to include the Gospel of John, chapter 7, verse 24. Here, the founder explicitly commands, "Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment." This is an imperative. It is not a suggestion. To refuse to judge righteously is to disobey a direct order of the source. Righteous judgment implies an evaluation based on an objective standard, not personal preference or superficial appearance. When a structural engineer condemns a bridge as unsafe, he is not expressing hatred for the bridge. He is applying the laws of physics to prevent a collapse. Similarly, when a believer identifies behavior that violates the source code, they are not being hateful. They are acknowledging spiritual structural failure. The refusal to judge righteously is often cowardly disguised as humility. It is easier to say, "Who am I to judge?" than to stand for a truth that might make you unpopular. Let us analyze the concept of fruit inspection. Later, in Matthew 7, verses 15 through 20, the text warns of false prophets who come in sheep's clothing but are inwardly ravenous wolves. The instruction given is, "You will know them by their fruits." This requires a rigorous analytical process. One must observe the output of a life, compare it against the standard of the source, and make a determination. If a tree produces poisonous berries, it is identified as dangerous. If a teacher produces doctrine that contradicts the source, they are identified as false. If judge not meant accept everyone, then the warnings against false prophets would be null and void. You would be required to welcome the wolf because you are forbidden to judge his teeth. This is illogical. Spiritual survival depends on the ability to detect a threat. The modern aversion to judgment has left the gates of the citadel wide open, allowing wolves to feast on the flock while the guardians smile and speak of tolerance. We must process the jurisdiction of judgment as defined by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. A case of severe immorality arose within the church. The community, perhaps like modern thinkers, was puffed up and tolerant rather than mourning the sin. Paul's rebuke is scathing. He asks, "For what have I to do with judging those also who are outside? Do you not judge those who are inside?" This establishes a critical boundary line. The believer is not the judge of the secular world. That is God's domain. However, within the house of faith, judgment is not only permitted, it is mandatory. To allow corruption to remain within the body is to infect the whole. Paul commands the removal of the unrepentant person. This is the harshest form of judgment available to humans, excommunication. Yet the motive is remedial, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Even severe judgment, when aligned with the source, is an act of redemptive love. This brings us to the core definition of love. The world defines love as unconditional affirmation of another's desires. The source defines love as willing the ultimate good of another. If the ultimate good is alignment with the Creator, then pointing out misalignment is the highest form of love. Leviticus 19:17 states, "You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him." Silence is interpreted here as hatred. If you see a man drinking poison and you say nothing because you do not want to offend his beverage choice, you do not love him. You love your own comfort. You love your own reputation as a nice person more than you love his life. True, judge not means avoiding the arrogance of thinking you are superior, but righteous judgment means loving the truth enough to speak it even when your voice shakes. It is the separation of the sin from the sinner, identifying the disease to save the patient. We arrive at the synthesis. The phrase, "judge not," is not a command to shut off your mind. It is a warning against playing God. You are not the final judge who determines eternal destiny. You do not see the heart, but you are a fruit inspector. You are a watchman. Do not judge hypocritically. Remove the log from your own eye first. Do not judge superficially. Look past the appearance, but do not surrender your discernment to a culture that demands you celebrate its decay. To be incapable of judgment is to be incapable of morality. Without the ability to identify the darkness, you cannot walk in the light. Use the source, analyze the fruit, speak the truth. If you seek the unfiltered logic of the divine, if you are tired of emotional platitudes, subscribe to Pure Source. Here only truth remains.